Well, perfect. Thank you all for tuning in. Everybody who's actually viewing the webinar from home or work, and also a big thank you to you, Steve, for helping me putting this Meet the Experts webinar session together, and for showing up today as well.
Thank you
Hi,
for
Steve.
inviting me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Really exciting for me too. So that's my first time hosting a Media Expert webinar. So I'll just start by introducing the actual format to all of the viewers and also to you, Steve. So at Playtest Cloud, we do have a YouTube channel that we are feeding with live webinar that we record with experts from the game user research field. And for today's session, we've decided with you, Steve, to focus on a series of mistakes or things that, as a new comer to playtesting, you should avoid or at least be aware of before you start playtesting. So I think we should quickly get going. I'll just, of course, make a short introduction on myself first and the company also. So for those of you who don't know, Playtest Cloud is a Berlin-based company, a like specialized in remote usability testing for mobile games. So this is a platform that was built for game studios, especially on mobile, to help you playtest your game and collect useful insights to just make your game better. And that's pretty much it for the company. Obviously, I'm a Playtest Cloud employee. I am a senior project management for 3.5 years now. I am working on playtest every day, and I think one of my colleagues said probably seen hundreds and hundreds of playtests myself. So that's why I think it's relevant for me to be here with you and talk about how mistakes can be avoided. Of course, we do have. I'm moving on here. Steve here. So Steve Bromley, who is definitely the expert I want to be talking to today to help you avoid these mistakes when you start playtesting. The Steve Bromley has a decade of experience in the game user research field, which is also a fairly new field. And Steve is actively working on doing mentoring and also just making the whole community sorry informed with a lot of good resources, newsletter. Your Twitter feed is also a gold mine when it comes to information for the topic, and you are also a very productive writer because you do have 2 books written on the topics. Steve, do you want to say a little something about yourself before we move on to the presentation?
I think that was an excellent summary. I guess what I've tried to do in my last decade of games user research experience is try and be very open about the process, about how it works, and help people who want to become a games user researcher or just want to, they're a UX designer or a games designer or a producer and they want to run better playtests, help them take advantage of games user research knowledge. Once again, I'm really excited about this opportunity to come and talk to everyone about games user research.
Well, thanks again. So I think without further ado, we should definitely get going. One last thing I'd love to say is that the presentation we're using and you're viewing today, I think is downloadable in a PDF form at I guess any time now. So if you have the need to follow a link, we'll put a few links, useful links for you in the presentation. You should go ahead and download it. So the structure is the following. We're not going for a presentation of all the 6 mistakes, and we'll just explain and explore them throughout the presentation today. So I guess my first question to you is that, and it's something we've seen at Playtest Cloud as well, is often people ask when is the actual best moment to playtest a game. And my question to you is the following. is it ever too early to playtest?
Fantastic question. I'm really happy with this format of us talking about common mistakes that I see from playtesting, because I think this actually is, when I speak to the teams that I work with, or people just come for playtesting advice, this is one of the most common issues that I see teams have. So teams often have reservations about testing. They think we need to wait until it's ready. They think that not all the assets are in, so there's no point doing it without all the assets in, or the tutorial isn't in yet, so what's the point without the tutorial? People get worried about, oh, aren't people going to see it and they'll steal my ideas, or they'll say it's bad and then they'll be bad for my marketing. And so it can be quite scary to run your first play test and to put things into the wild for that first time. And because of that, you see that teams often wait too long to test. They think, oh, that's the thing that I can do at the end. I'll develop most of my game and then I'll just do a bit of play testing at the end to tweak it. Or they wait to big production milestones. They'll wait until they'll do all their development through the production phase, get to an alpha version, and then that'll be the first time they expose their idea to players. Unfortunately, that leads to some challenges and some difficulties for people who are making games. Because you've left it so long before you start to expose it to players, you've got a whole bunch of hypotheses about players are going to enjoy this, or players are going to understand this, or this is a good idea that you haven't tested, and that risk gets quite significant, because inevitably, whenever we run a test, we find there are problems. We find players didn't understand the thing we think they're meant to understand, or players weren't able to do that thing, or even this concept isn't actually as fun as we thought it would be. It's not landing with players in the way in which we thought it would be. And if you've done a whole bunch of development work before you learn that, you get stuck, essentially, because you've committed lots of work, lots of time, lots of development, and it's really hard to roll back those decisions because no one wants to chuck away 6 months or a year's worth of work.
No.
Because of that, it's really risky to wait too long to test. And one of the things that I do talk to teams about, and I know that you do as well, is that actually play testing can be done throughout development. You don't need to wait until you've got a beta version. You don't need to wait until alpha. You don't even need to wait until you've made something.
Yeah, that is very, very true. The whole idea of playtesting that requires a build or a playable game is something that is often asked at Playtest Cloud, and we do have obviously a lot of solutions that should help studios playtest pretty much every single step of the development process. I'm going to move on to the next slide and show you that in details a little bit. So I've it's a schematic version of the life cycle of a game, of course, that starts in the concept phase, moved on to the production or even pre-production, and after that is actually being played by live players. So that's the live operations, live ops. Playtest Cloud can help you playtest or get some valuable insights. Early on, really, we've seen a lot of concept testing that are being used for, like you mentioned, trying to see if this specific art style of a game will resonate with the target audience, or looking at storyboard or mood board to try to understand what the players might be keen to appreciate or not. So concept testing, surveys as well, are also very good to draw personas from a marketing department to try to understand who the users or players are before you start making your game and start iterating on your game. We've also seen a lot of studios coming in with us and saying, hey, we think this genre is interesting. There's this flagship game from the genre, and we can help you playtest, do some competitive playtesting with some players you recruit, and so you don't need a build. You can use what's out there, really. When it comes to production and live ops, this is why I kind of mixed everything, because there are no really hard lines. So you can, of course, run a playtest when your game is at very, very alpha or very early stage of development with a couple of playable level, maybe missing UI or missing some of the like MVP. You have an MVP or a most valuable product that you want to play test. You can also try your multiplayer playtesting pretty early on. We've seen that, and it's pretty fun to see characters fighting with not like with characters that don't have all the UI or maps that are pretty much blocks of non-touched assets. So it's also very cool that players love it, and you can, of course, after that, when the game is live, get some valuable insight on these big questions that all the game studios are asking. How can we improve retention? Why our players are churning on day 3, and things like that. I guess multi-session and longitudinal studies have very proven benefits for that. So all in all, Playtest Cloud can help you play test at pretty much all the stages of your game or idea. Really, I think that's the point here.
One of the things I think, one of the ethoses I really believe, and I think a tool like Playtest Cloud does help with, is teams need to move away from that idea of let's do one big play test at the end of development and recognize that actually you can be doing lots of small, informal, rapid testing throughout development so that there's not that huge gap between you making the decision and you testing the decision. And yeah, I agree that the fact how Playtest Cloud works, where you can get immediate feedback back on your game, is a really useful tool for game designers and developers and UX people to bring testing earlier into their development lifecycle.
Nice. Thanks for that. I think it's very valid points all around. I think one question I had was when you are like a team, when you work in a like game studios and you have a build or project, a deliverable, something that you'd like to put out there and have players experience with. Do you have a couple of tips of things that the studios need to know about their actual game before starting playtesting?
So I guess what I normally think is really important is understanding both the state of the decisions that are being made in the team, what are the team currently thinking about, what decisions have they recently made, but also what is the state of the build? What is it? So the build, for people who are unfamiliar, is like a version of the game that has been produced. So we made a version today, and the build has everything that everyone's worked in up until today on.
Thanks for this clarification.
That obviously has a huge impact on what you can test, because you both got your research objectives, what we want to learn about the game, but you also need to know what you've got available and combine those so you can come up with realistic tasks or make sure you are finding realistic answers to your questions. There sometimes can be issues such as, for example, if the tutorial isn't in, and if you haven't recognized that the tutorial's not in yet and you're not taking steps to mitigate it, you're going to be causing a whole bunch of usability issues that are unintended because they're there just because the tutorial's not in, because you were unaware of the state of your build, rather than you actually genuinely testing these things.
Nice that you mentioned the tutorial. It's something that really often came up on my plate, where you have studios having a build that they've played, but they're developing the game, so they know how it works. But then they have a missing tutorial because of time constraints. And do you think that tutorial is a must in a playtest, or do you think studios might be able to find ways to playtest without a proper tutorial in game?
I think that's a great question, and as you say, a very common situation where teams build the tutorial last, and so how can you test the other things until the tutorial in is a question. What we do when we're doing in-person research, and I know you also do at Playtest Cloud, is it is possible to work around that. You can find other ways of teaching players the things that you would expect them to know in a tutorial. In person, I might be giving a tutorial at the start of the session. So before everyone plays, I explain the controls and this is how it works. We might print out a control scheme and leave them with the control scheme. Or you might ask them to go through a presentation of things before. you actually get into the playtest proper. Obviously, as a researcher, we know that's not the same as a real tutorial, and we haven't tested the tutorial, and there's still a big risk there that if the tutorial doesn't really teach these things, if the tutorial is ineffective,
Mm-hmm.
we're not learning that problem's there. But on the other hand, as long as we're aware we haven't tested the tutorial and that's not what we're trying to learn from this study, that means that you're not going to cause artificial usability issues just because the players don't know the controls, they don't know what buttons do, and you
Mm-hmm.
can genuinely get real usability issues from the players understanding the game.
Cool. Really glad to hear that there are ways to go over this, because you'd be surprised it often comes in that tutorial is not the first time. You'd be surprised that's the first things to be developed, but not always really. I had like a question prepared for you for this section, I guess. It's a question related to to the dynamics you have in a game team, I guess. So how would you best improve the cooperation between different people, personalities inside of a department, inside of a game team to support the game and playtesting, of course?
I think that's a great question and very relevant because we're talking about knowing what do we need to know about the games.
Mm-hmm.
What you see often, well, it depends on the studio, but what you see in some studios is there are silos. The design team are working hard on what they're doing. The developers are working hard on what they're doing. The artists are working hard on what they're doing. And it's only the producer or only a few people who have that overarching view of what's everyone doing and what is the state of the game today and what's working, what's not working, where are the bugs. As a researcher, I find that often actually we're the glue between the teams, because to do our job well, we need to understand exactly what the design intent is, what the game's going to do, and how it's going to work. And we need to understand how it works today. If we are going to put the build in front of players today, what is it that is in it? And so we're forced to have those conversations. And by having those conversations, asking those questions, bringing that information from the other teams, actually, it can often be user researchers who have one of the most realistic oversights of the current state of the build, and they can pass that information between people as they're having those chats. So yeah, I think that is part of the user research role as well.
Nice, very interesting. I'm totally gonna steal "we are the glue" within the team.
Yes.
This is written on my notepad here. Yeah, thanks a lot for this answering this. It's a question I had a long time ago that keep coming across when I read about game user research. One thing about the state of the game is, and I'm going to move on to the other slide. I've compiled a couple of examples or things that nobody really thinks about a whole lot, but that I've seen, causing some frictions with the players when they start a playtest, and it's not technical enough to say it's, I guess, simple to avoid, but to some extent, I think you can spend time and at least think about these points. So the first one is definitely the permissions. So it's mobile heavy, of course, but that's what I do, mobile playtesting. So yeah, often when you send a build or a game to a player, it's us sending something into their smartphone, which let's agree that probably the most touched object you own. So it has a personal touch to it. So if you have a game that has all the permissions enabled on like Unity or whatever you develop it, then it can get very intrusive for a player. Like game A would like to access your location, face camera, and all of that is already affecting the FTUE or first time user experience before the game even has started. And we've seen that players are vocal and they will tell you, hey, love the graphics, love everything, but my location, my front camera, it's a no-go. So I think it's easily avoidable. The debug commands is another one. So debug commands are, I guess, tools from software developer who are building the game to interact with the game. And sometimes it's definitely meant to be internal, so you'll never see debug commands live. hopefully. But sometimes, yeah, it's present in builds that we playtest. Sometimes, of course, it's needed for a specific playtest need. I don't know, reach level 100 in one tap. But I think you should always be aware of like the state of your build. If it's present, you should, and you don't expect players to interact with it, you should let the players know. And players are curious, and if they see a button that give all the new weapon in the game, they will tap on it and they will do it. So I think it's also something you can easily fix or adapt. And the third point is it's a big surprise that I've discovered at Playtest Cloud, but the in-game audio is something that the players are not kidding with. In-game audio, if it's present in your build, it's fine. If it's not and it's not announced, players will be very vocal. They will tell you, "Hey, the game was good. Tutorial was nice. I'd probably play this game again, but in-game audio is a no-go again." If you have in-game audio, great. If you don't, letting the players know that it's a work in progress build, not all the features are present. I think it's a nice touch up. And the last point, I guess it's something I've done at least 3 times during this short presentation, is using jargon or technical terms. Yeah, you don't want to be, if you talk to a specific type of players, I don't know, don't want to give out, but let's say casual players who are of a certain age, and you will start talking about CBT, FTUE, and you want them to do, specific, specific terms. I think it's, I'm certain of that. It's affecting somehow the relationship that you have and you are creating with your players or your testers. And that's it for me. Just a few points that, my 3 years of career,
I like that last one. I think it's really easy to forget how different we are as people working in the gaming industry from a typical player. And so you're going to start using terms and words that players don't understand. And then that means if you're asking survey questions, for example, you're getting junk data back because they haven't really answered the question. I think that's a really astute point you've made.
Nice. So, I mean, again, this point for the state of the build is like has been clearly answered. I believe we can now move on to the third point. So the third point is, I guess, the core, or one of the core aspect of your job as a good game user researcher is the defining the research objective. So maybe I can start with a few things that I've seen on playtest, and that I think very subjective, but I think that the phase where the research goal were defined was a bit either too ambitious or maybe sometimes too like pressed by the time. So there's this like idea that you can bundle everything in one big playtest. It's something you warned us about earlier, but it's something we're seeing sometimes where you really want players to, like, you don't have a tutorial. Let's say you want players to do a lot of playtest a lot of aspects of your game, so you tended to put a lot of tasks in your playtest, or like really guide the players. But then at the end of a survey, you ask them how, if the playtest was actually enjoyable, and how did you like? It's not the actual first time user experience that the players will face out there from the Play Store. But sometimes there's a bit of a mix. We're seeing also post playtest surveys being used as concept testing, really. So very much a mix of I believe research goals that can harm the playtest. Harm the playtest, it's definitely a big term, but it creates player confusion sometimes, player fatigue as well, when you want players to play for long hours sometimes and then answer very, very extensive surveys. So I just do believe that it can affect the quality of the results you might get from it. From your experience, I guess, do you have any tips from our viewers and myself, I guess, to help people who actually make playtests that define their research goals?
Yeah, exactly as you described. I think that's a very common mistake is teams not properly defining their research objectives or just saying, I want to run a playtest without really thinking about what they want to learn from that playtest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a model of thinking about it and then an approach from that that I find really helpful is recognizing that the point of playtest is to reduce risk that you're going to release a game that isn't fun, risk that you're going to release a game that players don't understand what they're meant to do. And so we can start to think about, okay, what are the riskiest decisions that the teams have made? A second important thing to think about is that point about design decisions. So actually everyone on the game team is having an impact on the game and the user experience and what's being created. It's not just the game designer. Also, the artists are doing things that are going to impact what a player understands, what they can do. The sound designer can also impacts it. Narrative design, any type of design has a real impact on the player experience. And so, as a user researcher, what we have to do is speak to all those disciplines, learn all of the decisions they've made, and then also speak to them about the riskiness of that decision. Is it have they made a decision that they've made 100 times before and it's always worked and it's not a big part of the game, and so it's not something that we particularly need to worry about? Or is it something untested that we've never done before? Is it on the core path, so it's a really critical part of what the game's going to do? Is it a thing the player's going to have to do all the time? And by going through that matrix of decisions about rating each of the things that is being worked on in the game and the current state of them, you can prioritize the risks of the game. What are the 10 top riskiest things that could go wrong in this game? And then that can directly translate into your research objectives. You can pick the top 3 risky things and then design the right tasks, use the right methods, avoid all those risks you talked about players getting confused or getting fatigued by having one giant study. Just do small directed studies to answer each of these risky objectives. Yeah.
I have a quick question for you. How do you, as a game researcher, how do you assess the risk? Like, do you start by making assumption and working with your methodology, or do you very early on approach game designers or producers and like try to get information out there within your team? Or how do you assess the risks?
That's a great point, and I think it has to be done in collaboration with people who also have an oversight of the game. Like the producers often have a very good understanding of the state of the game and what's risky about it. But for my own practice, I have a matrix that I don't have available at the second. I can share it on Twitter after if people follow me, which does ask, it's prompt for the researchers to ask, is this those questions? Is this on a core path? Is it something that we know if it's going to work, or if it we have concerns about? Is it a thing that the team are still working on? And if we did that test, they'll be able to react to the findings. And so it's like a decision matrix that takes you through that risk assessment process. I think a lot of researchers just do that informally and are thinking about it in the back of their head based on their experience. But when you're starting out, I think it's helpful to have some guidelines. So I'll pop them on Twitter after.
Nice, good resource again.
Yes.
I told you for the viewers, Steve is a goldmine of resources like this. I didn't lie. Yeah, again, thanks a lot for the working on defining the research objectives. Obviously, that's core of what you do as game user researcher. So I was only witnessing what can go wrong really when I believe it's a bit unclear. Yeah, I think we can already move on to the next point. I mean, the fifth mistake, or next traps you should avoid. Really, this one is this one will be very interesting because it has to do with the players, and at the end of the day, that's what matters when you do a playtest. It's see what the players have to say about your game or the state of your project. So maybe you can walk us through this question. So that's a question on the top. What can you learn from, I'd say, just 5 users, just to be the advocate of devil here? But it comes back all the time. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I think that's a great point, and I'm sure many people on the call are familiar with the idea, but there's a difference between quantitative research, where you're going after measuring and big numbers of people, and qualitative research, where you're going in depth with just a few users. And one of the mistakes I see teams make, or one of the concerns that I'm sure you hear from teams as well, is what's the point of qualitative research? Why should we bother just testing with 5 people when we could be getting 100 people in, doing a big survey and getting results from that? Where this mistake or this misconception comes from is a misunderstanding about what we're trying to learn from qualitative research. Again, if we go back to thinking about our research objectives, some types of research objectives are things where you do have to measure. For example, is there a difficulty spike on this level? Are players dying more often, or are they spending more time on this level than other levels? Those are measurement type questions where you do want to get a lot of people and quantitative research from. But other types of objectives that teams might have, you want to understand what's going on in players' minds and what are they thinking. So, for example, why do players go the wrong way on this level? Or why do players not learn how to use the inventory system? Or why do players not discover fast travel? You're not going to get the answer to that from a big survey. You're going to have to take a couple of users, watch them play. If you have the ability to, if you're doing this as moderated research, asking them questions at the right time, so it reveals what's going on in their heads. What have they seen? What are they thinking about? And from that, you get the inspiration about why is the design not landing in the way I think it should be, and what interventions, what changes do we need to make to fix the game for these players. One of the reasons why people talk about 5 users specifically is because for usability issues where people don't understand what's happening in the game or they've missed something, there's some previous research done by Nielsen Norman shows that actually after about 5 users, you've spotted around 85% of those big issues. So you've seen a lot of the problems. And as we mentioned, you're not trying to measure the problems outside. You're not trying to say how many people have that problem. You're just trying to see if a problem exists so that you can go and fix it. After those 5 users, if you did another 10, you will learn more issues, but not a huge amount more. You might just push that from you've found 85% of the issues to 90% of the issues. And then you're not really getting the return on investment for your time or the participant cost or the amount of time it takes to do an extra 5 users, when you could do 5 users, fix those problems, and then do another 5 users on a fixed version of that game. Just keeps revealing more issues.
I see.
So yeah, I think qualitative research is often, the value of it is missed or misunderstood, whereas really it's about what you're trying to learn about the game at that point, which influences this.
Nice. So yeah, that's again something that personally I've read in like many places, that there are unexpected results that you will not even think about while doing a playtest. Players will tell you something, talk about something, their like actual experience, and also phrase it the way they actually talk. And yeah, there's also like this, I think this side of the qualitative research that we're seeing at Playtest Cloud is the wow effect, the I never thought about that effect that some of the people who watch and work on the videos share with us sometimes. There was one thing I also wanted to maybe approach here, I believe. So yeah, you walk us through the importance of having qualitative research in game user research. At Playtest Cloud, we do have a like several, definitely call them product, but different ways to playtest, and of course some of them are traditionally more on the qualitative study styles. I'm thinking the standalone survey, as you said, collect a big sample of respondents and then work with the data, work with the hard data and try to make sense of the numbers. So yeah, standalone surveys are something we see a lot at Playtest Cloud, and they are something we keep track on, and personally enjoy them because we do have a like built-in tool at Playtest Cloud to support quantitative studies, but we also support, and I think that's very good, all of the very high-end survey tools out there. So I'm not gonna quote or name them, but particularly love the one that recently changed name. I think it really like I'm using surveys a lot to recruit players as well, but also for work. And yeah, it just opens up the possibilities. The tools are getting more and more powerful out there, and it's just opens up the like all the opportunities that you can get from quantitative studies, also on Playtest Cloud, but not only. Another thing I'm a big fan of really is the post playtest survey. I think they're really good. I mean, fun of just enjoy this format, like something short and sweet at the end to after the players have played the game, and then I often like how clients or game studios really get back to us and say, oh well, look, there's a discrepancy between a question we ask in the survey and something they said at minute 34 of the playtest, and then yeah, it's often like nice to see how like a player, for example, will react to something in a stressful or challenging situation, which video games like love to do, and then how they interpret something in a post playtest survey. So I think it's good to have this like hybrid option as well that you can get from a video, and then maybe from more survey as well. We do have some other ways to get some qualitative results, and it's something we don't really talk about much, but something that's been well, definitely democratized, let's say, because of the health situation globally, that interviews or focus groups that are done remotely are also something we do a lot. And again, there are like a lot of good info you can get, qualitative info you can get after a playtest, for example, to ask more questions, maybe to really go like deep into this specific player and their experience as well. So definitely have tools to mix those qualitative and quantitative studies on the platform as well. I think I'll stop doing the talking for these specific points. What we learned really is that, to sum up what you said and I said, we're going to learn a lot from 5 users. Qualitative studies and qualitative results are like, as you said, going to at least spot vast majority of the issues that you're looking for in a playtest. I think we can stay in the topic of players, which is again my favorite, and just really quickly move on to the next point, which is something you told me is also very important to you, is the recruitment, how to get the players, and the work you need to do to recruit and find the players. Maybe you can tell us more about this.
Yeah, of course. And so in my role, I often speak with teams who haven't done a lot of playtesting or don't have a huge amount of budget or time available to do playtesting.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest challenges they have, but also I think a big potential for an error, is actually finding the right kind of players. And often by circumstance, they're forced to recruit just whoever's convenient. That can be game dev students if they are a game dev student themselves, pulling people off the street. They might use a community if they have a community. But what these teams are failing to do is actually spending the time to define who are the people who are going to buy their game and actually be the ones really playing their game after they make it. That creates, again, a risk. I talk a lot about risks, apparently. If you're putting the wrong type of people in front of your games, you're going to learn some problems, and some opinions, but they're not going to be the same problems and opinions as your real users might have. So, for example, if you're pulling people off the street and they've never played a first-person shooter before, and you're making a first-person shooter, obviously they're going to have difficulty with the controls and knowing how the game works and that kind of thing. But they're not going to buy the game eventually. Your real audience is probably people who have bought other first-person shooters and played other first-person shooters. And so their knowledge and their experience and what they'll bring to it will be different. One of the ways of thinking about it that I speak to teams about, and I think is very valuable, is focusing on players' behavior and purchase behavior, particularly when defining your players. So to think about who your players are, think about what other games do you expect them to have bought, what other games do you expect them to have played, how often do you expect them to buy games, where do they get their games from? If your game is being sold on the App Store, you want people who are getting games from the App Store, not people who play only things off Steam.
Yeah.
And thinking about their behavior and where they're going to buy the game and other games they've played, you can come up with a definition of your players that you can then use to screen based on. One of, and I know you have a point on this as well, or an opinion on this. One of the mistakes I think teams sometimes fall into is trying too hard to base their definition on demographics. And there's been this, you've probably seen the image on the internet going around over the last couple of weeks, which says, if you define people on demographics, you can describe a white male who was born in 1948, they've got an income of over £1 million, they live in England in a castle, and I don't know who you're thinking of, but it might be Prince Charles. It is that does describe Prince Charles, but all of those things also describe Ozzy Osbourne, who's obviously a completely different person. And without actually spending the time, if you're just focusing on demographics, you might fall into that kind of error, whereas instead you want to focus on their behavior and what they're actually doing. I think it's important.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. Really, like, again, I'll be talking Playtest Club, but I only talk about the things I love, and recruitment at Playtest Club is something I enjoy. I'm just going to show you real quick how we do it at Playtest Club, not how we recruit players, but how we do the targeting. So the targeting is definitely like joins some of the points that you mentioned. So there are, of course, demographic informations that are valuable and important for game studios. So mainly when you recruit someone or when you select a player on the platform, you'd be able to select these demographics info, the gender, the age range, the location, and also the device, which potentially could be also a type of preferences. So I wouldn't put a third column in the middle. But then, we do have, of course, and that's, I think, the best part of recruiting players on the platform is trying to find players who are experienced with some games and what are their preferences. By default, you have, like, we categorize players into, gamer types or player types, or, casual, mid-core, and hardcore. And we do also have players let us know what games they favorite of all time. So games that they just, often you'll see Mario Kart in this section. I mean, I think everybody who is millennial or late Gen Z had fun with their siblings playing this game. And I think that's a game that sticks. And we often, I think it's one of the best, most represented in the favorite section. But then, of course, we pay attention to what games the players play, really. And also how many hours they play, so that helps us define who they are. And when we do special targeting, which I really enjoy, is, for example, if you are a game studio and you ask stuff like, I'd love someone who is experienced with Stardew Valley but span, I don't know, like 4 years in game, or like something that has a very specific level of experience towards a game. So we do have some techniques in place. I'm not gonna go over them today, but just to get back to your point, demographic info, just between you and I and the viewers, whenever we have challenging target audience to recruit, we do what we call relax the target audience in after talking with the game studios, and the demographics info are always the first one to try to be relaxed. So, hey, if we cannot find players at age 16-24, would you be able to extend to 16-30 years old? Can we invite players from the US as well? And we're seeing a lot of understanding with the game studios there. So I guess that echoes one of your point, that behavior stronger than demographics for targeting players.
I think that's a really sensible approach. If you're going to flex something, flex on the demographics. One of the risks, I think, with demographics is people have preconceived notions about what a gamer looks like. They think they're thinking, it's a 18-year-old male, and often those can be stereotypes. They can be outdated. And so by being more flexible with the demographics, but being rigorous with your behaviour, I think that's a really nice way of stopping from getting caught in stereotypes about who gamers are.
Nice. Let's fight stereotypes in general, and in game user research in particular. Yeah, thanks a lot for this clarification. Again, I could nerd about player recruitment a lot. I think we can also move on to our next point, and I guess final point or final mistakes. And this is very an interesting one for all of us. I'm gonna just move on to the next slide, and it has to do with I'd say the professionalization of game user research in game teams. Really, like, do you need a GUR game user researcher to, or do you need to be a game user researcher to run playtests and do like collect insights from players?
Yeah, and I can see why teams might sometimes think that. They might think, I'm not a user researcher, so I can't really do this kind of thing. Research can be very intimidating. Like all the effort that we have to put into finding the right kind of players, all the effort into designing the study and coming up with the right tasks and going through a rigorous analysis process is a professional job. And big studios who have the budget to do it employ people to do it full time. What I'm really enthusiastic about, though, is the idea that just because it is a professional job and lots of people do it full time, that shouldn't stop people, game designers and other people incorporating playtesting into how they work. Obviously, a huge bunch of teams can't afford to have a full-time user researcher or don't have a user researcher on staff, and so they just have to do what they can. And I think that's really important, because a lot of the value of playtesting, yes, you'll make some mistakes, you might not get quite the right recruit, you might miss some things in analysis, but you're still getting 95% of the value regardless of that background. And there's a lot of resources out there to help teams to try and do this kind of thing. I know Playtest Cloud have a book out. I have a book about games user research. There's the games research and UX community, who are always really helpful and open and put on a lot of conferences and things to help people learn how to do user research or do good user research. My last point about this, what I really like is the mindset of treating research as an iterative process. So cool, do your first play test, make some mistakes, that's to be expected. But after you've run that play test, reflect on the process, go back and look at how did recruitment go, how did analysis go, how did the moderation go, what do we need to do differently next time, write down what you're going to do differently next time. Then next time you get slightly better, then review it again. Then every time you run a playtest, you iteratively improve the quality of it. And I think from that, you can build a really robust playtesting process, regardless of your background.
Nice. Yeah, I can only back this up from experience at Playtest Cloud. We do have a, I guess I can even start my next point. We do have a, a wide variety of profiles. Of course, pretty much all of them coming from the gaming studio scenes, right? So game designers, artists, also designers, UI, UX, marketing, obviously product manager, and game user researchers that are, of course, dedicated. Like, all of these profiles are using the platform, and I think it's just a testament to what Playtest Cloud is really. It started by it was really created as a platform for game studios. That's the first thing, really. And when we created the platform, it was always clear that it's a platform that needs to be like user-centered, needs to be usable and used by small, intermediary, and also large studios. So that's, again, part of our DNA. Doesn't really matter. You don't need to be a game user researcher. Obviously, you need the like expertise and the savoir-faire and all of that. But the platform itself really is something you can use in a collaborative fashion as well. I mean, we say that sharing the insight is as important as collecting them or working on them, because at some point you want to be showing anyone in the team, what a player faced, how does a friction looks like in real life for a player, and I think there's just so much value into the actual tool, from sharing survey data, sharing part of a video, annotated, working together on a video with your teammate. So that's again one of the big plus of the platform. And also the last one is that on the platform you will collect data, you will target the right players for your playtest. But if you don't have the time, if you don't even have the resources in your team or company, we can also help you with the analysis part, to some extent to the design of your studies as well, with seasoned game user researcher out there. And that's how Steve and I met, I guess, for work, working on several projects over the course of the last years, I think. And just great projects all along to help bring this expertise from out there to game studios. It's always beneficial, and it's only good feeling for all parties, really.
I really like your second point about sharing insights with the team. One of the challenges, I think, when you are a solo user researcher and you are a dedicated user researcher, is you don't make any design decisions yourself. Actually, it's the UX designers, it's the producers, all the people you mentioned who actually have to action what you've learned. And so it's really nice to be able to share clips, as you said, or find ways of sharing what you've seen in the playtest with other disciplines as well. That's a really powerful tool for actually having impact with your studies. So that's very nice.
Nice. The tool is good. I mean, again, I'll be talking a little bit more about the tool later and we won't have the time, so we'll collect some questions. But just have a look at Playtest Cloud if you want to see how it looks. I guess it really concludes the whole 6 points we worked on together to define Steve and I. Again, Steve, thank you for having taken the time to work through and design most of them as well. Very, very, very insightful for all of us. I asked the questions I wanted to ask, so I'm happy. I guess maybe we can move on to the next part where we'll just show some resources that might be useful for you all. And of course, the first one will be definitely your book. Steve, maybe you want to tell us a few words about what you've been working on last year.
So for about 5 years, I ran the mentoring scheme for the games research and UX community. And from that, I spoke to a lot of people who were either at the beginning of their career as a games user researcher or were interested in becoming a games user researcher. They're doing a boot camp or some sort of degree, and learn a lot of the questions that people who are interested in becoming games user researchers have. Last year, I wrote them all down and wrote some answers to all of them. So the book covers a bit about how do games get made and where's the potential for research and how do we get involved in the game development process. A lot about how do you design and run a reliable playtest, and then a bit about how do you get a job in games. So what do you need to do for a portfolio? What are interview processes like? How do you become a great candidate when you're actually interviewing?
Nice.
It's been really nice and a great thing to share with the community.
Cool. Did you get some feedback from I don't know, like maybe students who read the book and then applied for their first job and got it, or testimonial from I guess?
Yeah, I've been really happy with the feedback. As part of the development of it, I had industry professionals read it and give feedback, iterate on it. So I'm really happy with the professional peer feedback. Also, as I've seen on the Amazon reviews and from the stories that people have told me, I think it is a helpful resource. If this is, well, both if you want to do this as a full-time job, people have said that's really helpful for that, but also an audience that I wasn't really aiming at, but people who they are a UX designer or a producer or they work in marketing and playtesting is just a bit of their job. I also think I've heard a bit from people who say it's very helpful for that too. So that's been a nice thing as well.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for having wrote this book and getting the chance to talk about it a little bit with us. Just moving on because of time constraint to an internal resource that I used. So it's a mobile playtesting book that Gareth Lloyd, our in-house game user researcher, wrote with the team as well. I think it was a collective effort, really, and it's just such a nice resource as well to go hands-on into playtesting. That's something you can also get by following the link. That's why you might want to download this presentation now to get the good links and be able to, self-study, get some good knowledge out there. And I think, the last bit will be for you, Steve, to walk us through some of the takeaways that we've learned today.
Oh, yes, just to sum up. So the framing of this was we were looking at some common mistakes that teams make when playtesting. And so just for some points to take away, I took each of those mistakes and tried to give a positive message about each of them. And so some of the lessons I hope we've covered today is that teams should be testing earlier than they want to, or that they feel comfortable with. The longer you wait to play test, the more risk you're involving. They need to spend the time understanding the state of their builds, the version of the game that they're working on, so that they can make sure that it is in a state where they can reliably answer the objectives they're working on. And that third point, that objectives are really important to get the most value from your playtest and make sure you're not missing data or missing opportunities. You need to put some conscious thought into what do I need to learn about my game at this point, and then what's the right task for it. We've also talked a bit about the value of qualitative research. Again, for teams who don't have a huge budget, they might think, oh, it's a shame I can only get 5 users. Actually, for many research objectives, 5 users is perfect. You can learn a huge amount of value from that, and it'll give you enough insight that you can make a huge impact on the quality of your game. And that last point about not being scared, although user research is a professional field and people do it full-time as a job, I think if you go in, learn, take advantage of the resources out there, reflect on your process, everyone should feel confident at least running their first play test and seeing how it goes.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks a lot for having such a Steve thing to do to put a positive spin on it, and I really appreciate that. Thanks a lot for these takeaways. I think we do have a couple of minutes, 3 to be accurate, for a couple of questions. I mean, we do have one from Jason from the chat who asked you, when you do early stage playtesting, is it generally done with internal staff, or do you conduct with your target audience?
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a good question, Jason. And it really depends where you are. So one of the reasons why teams resist using external playtesters and start using internal playtesters is concerned about leaks. So, and because games, especially AAA games, spend so much on marketing, they don't want data coming out from playtests that will accidentally ruin their marketing plan or will be on Reddit, which doesn't push some teams towards doing internal tests. Unfortunately, internal tests, they're fine for some objectives, especially if you're trying, if it's just general usability maybe, but because your internal staff are not your real players, they don't come from the same background, they have different knowledge, different expectations, and different experience. There's a whole bunch of data that you're not getting when you're doing tests with internal staff. So although it is very common, and especially big AAA studios will do that, I think that is a mistake, and perhaps a 7th mistake. No, it's the one about finding the right players, isn't it? They didn't find the right players that we talked about. I believe that there are workarounds. So the risk is leaks. If you bring them in-house to you, you can take away recording devices like mobile phones. You can make them sign an NDA. There's ways to de-risk leaks, and so you can get the right kind of players early on. I think it's a really interesting topic, though. Thanks for asking, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, we do have another one from the chat. Yeah, Jake. How do you approach players' feedback you were not expecting, or something that goes against what you thought was true?
Yeah, I guess both of those things seem different to me. So things I didn't expect, that's fantastic. If we're seeing an issue we didn't anticipate, that's the value of research, because we, although we spend a lot of time with users as user researchers, we're not user experts and we can't channel user behavior. We have to see real player behavior.
Yep.
And so a lot of the value is seeing that. The second part of the question was about something that you might not think is true.
Yeah, it's something that actually you think is true, but yeah, it goes against that, like their feedback.
I guess the mindset is really important to have as a user researcher, is being unbiased. I don't have a stake in the game. I'm here just to find the truth. So I shouldn't go in with a preconception about what is true. If you have reliably screened your player, you're confident that's a real player, especially if you're focusing on the player behavior. The player really did that thing in the game. And also you're aware of the state of your build. It wasn't caused by it being a prototype or not being finished. It was a real version issue that exists in the real game. I think you should take what you've seen as true rather than try and impose your own viewpoint and bias on what you're seeing.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for this one. Yeah, I'm just looking at the actual timer, and it looks like we are in the overtime now. So just to make it all on time, I think we can move on to the next really follow-ups slide, where you just have some links where you can contact Steve for any questions. Again, I really invite you to follow Steve on social media, get that newsletter, sign up, and get the good information from the book as well. If you want to get in touch with Playdesk Cloud, there's this email address you can use. Of course, you can start by playtesting. I think that's the best way to approach the platform. There's a free trial for that, so you can enjoy it for free. And if you want to chat with me, you can connect via LinkedIn. I think that's it for today. I mean, that's all the time we had. Again, thank you for all the viewers for tuning in today. Steve, massive thanks to you. I hope we will get to chat and work together in 2022 already.
Thank you again, both for hosting this today and also everyone who's turned up to listen. They've been great questions and I really enjoyed it.
Nice. The recording will be made available on YouTube as well. So if you missed it, you can VOD. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll stop the recording just now. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.